Hello. This is episode 3 of From the Ground Up, which is a monthly podcast about women who have taken unique and groundbreaking ideas in theater and translated them into reality. And with me today is Nicole Stodard of Thinking Cap Theater. And here's Nicole.
Ta-da.
Hey, Nicole.
Hey, Lori.
So I'm really excited about this interview because I've always admired your work with Thinking Cap. And so it's a real privilege to have you with me today. Thank you for agreeing.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
awesome.
happy.
All right. So how did you conceive of Thinking Cap, and when did you start the company? If you could just talk about beginnings.
Sure. So I founded Thinking Cap in 2010. And it really was a product of a couple of things. I had recently lost my sister to cancer, and I had taken a leave of absence from school where I was doing a PhD at University of South Florida. And I had spent some time working freelance for a hospice on this coast in Stewart. And they had me do drama workshops and write an original piece for specifically for Black youth to help them grieve a loss in their community due to gun violence. And so I had those experiences, and I also started reading a lot of blogs. Blogs were still kind of a newer thing in 2010. And so I started my own blog, and I read a lot of other blogs, and I read a lot of new plays, and I met a lot of producers and directors around the country that were creating theater that interested me. And so I decided that my next move would be to start a theater company. And I was living in Tampa. I came to South Florida, and I saw some shows, and I did a sort of recon mission of the area and realized that there really was not anything like the kind of company that I wanted to create. And so I created it.
So tell me about this kind of company that you wanted to create. What was your idea?
Well, obviously, with a name like Thinking Cap, it means that you're interested in theater that is thought-provoking, and theater that is smart. Theater, I mean, my background was very academic at the time. I had studied theater for my master's degree, and then I was doing a doctorate in an English department. So dramaturgically intensive kind of theater. But also theater that really was kind of embodying equity, diversity, and inclusion long before those terms were buzzwords like they are now. So sort of prioritizing from the very start, gender parity. So we've never had a season in the last 12 or 13 years that we haven't had gender parity in terms of the playwrights that we've programmed. And we've always prioritized having women artists involved behind the scenes, hiring women directors, women designers, and I would say an additional criterion is experimentation. So we've frequently programmed plays that experiment with form and sort of push the boundaries of what we conceive of as theater. And we've produced plays or productions that experiment with how classical plays like Shakespeare's King Lear can be performed.
Okay, great. And tell me something about your experiences with Thinking Cap. Are there any stories that you have to tell, or is there anything you could share that?
I mean, Thinking Cap has had a kind of interesting existence. We started doing productions initially at Empire Stage in Fort Lauderdale. And we did several shows there. We did some pop-up performances in different locations, sometimes in a restaurant in Oakland Park. We eventually moved into a dedicated space of our own, the Vanguard. While that was under renovation in around 2014, we did a production at Muse. So we had kind of a nomadic existence early on, before having residence in our own space. And then once the pandemic hit, we really weren't sure what we were going to do with Thinking Cap, and we weren't unique in that regard. I mean, many artists left the profession and have not come back. And I think we're still in a place of trying to figure out what our year-to-year sort of programming is going to look like. But we moved into a new space, took a new residency at Mad Arts in Dania Beach just last year when we reopened. And so I guess I would say, you know, something that I've realized with Thinking Cap is that if you have a strong mission, you can have resilience, and you can move about and survive, whether you have a residence or whether you are nomadic, because that's what we've done.
So you have a residency now at Mad Arts?
Correct.
That's a permanent kind of situation, or
I mean, we're
temporary?
for renewal annually. So we had our first year there last year, and we will renew again for the next season as well.
Okay, great. What is your approach to producing a show? I mean, what's your process for?
So producing as in funding and marketing, or like in terms of directing and designing?
Yeah, more of that side, the direction and design side.
I would say, you know, it really depends on the piece. It depends on the size and scale of the piece, the age of the piece. It really kind of dictates how far out I personally, from a directing standpoint, back out in my process. I mean, often whenever you've chosen plays for a season, or when I've chosen plays for a season, I find that they're with me, sort of floating around, and I'm ideating about what the production is going to look like and sound like, and how the process will work, for many, many months before I ever actively am working on it. So the process can, you know, there's like a long gestation period, I would say, I guess, when it comes to directing pieces that are specifically for Thinking Cap. But really it is the nature of the piece, right? I mean, if it's a new work and there's not a lot of, you know, review history to dig up, or a lot of historical context, it just, you know, the piece kind of dictates for me how far out I plan, and also how I approach the work. Like I would say, last year in particular, working on a play by Fornes called Fefo and Her Friends, which was a site-specific piece. It was something that I worked on for a very long time before I ever got to the rehearsal process, and sort of had a very specific idea of what I wanted the rehearsal process to consist of. That's become increasingly more sort of holistic and engaging actors in writing exercises and group exercises and sort of spiritual exercises and physical exercises that aren't necessarily something that I would incorporate into every process. In fact, when we got to the next main stage show after that last year, a piece about Oscar Wilde, it was very, 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 very different kind of process, and very different kind of writing, much denser text and more dialogue heavy, and there was a different kind of focus. So I would say, you know, my approach is kind of flexible and fluid depending on the play and the playwright that I'm working with.
Can you tell me something about some of your favorite shows that you've directed or produced?
I mean, I would say that my favorite shows have been shows that I see sort of fitting within a body of work that looks like something I recognize as my own or as a thinking cap piece. And it's, many of the pieces that we've done start to look that way to me as I look back at production photos when we go to update our archives on our website. But some definitely stand out more than others that have a strong sort of visual design element. And I would say this goes back to a one-person show that we did called Grounded, where Nikki Fried played the part of a female fighter pilot. That was perhaps one of the first shows that we did where we used projection. And I think that was in either 2015 or 2016. And so projection is something that's become increasingly more part of our work. As you know, we did a holiday show this past December, and there was a lot of visual storytelling that happened through the projection. It allows for quick changes of a sort of scenic backdrop that wouldn't otherwise be possible. And so going back to Grounded and then looking forward, I mean, we've continued to have, I like to play with color. And so I find projection is a really powerful way, not just to show specific images, but just to express mood through color with projection. So all of the pieces that we've done that reflect that, like King Lear was a piece that was very sort of moody and brooding, and projection was a key element in that. And also in our production of Mud, another play by Maria Irene Fornés. So when I look back and I see those pieces, and and there are often pieces that I've worked on with company members or artists that I've worked with routinely that are like family. Those are the shows that I think still stick with me the most and remain the most meaningful.
And the Mad Art space, it particularly lends itself to projection, right? The space itself, or
yeah, I mean, it's really a wide open kind of warehouse style space with large walls in terms of width and height, and creates the possibility of using multiple projectors at once. And high ceiling really helps with that as well. So Mad is a good space for us in terms of using projection. Although really the size and of the space and the height of the ceiling and the theater at Mad is comparable to what we had at the Vanguard, where we were already using projection. But Mad certainly has equipment that
right,
much more. Yeah,
there's a lot of equipment there, a lot of projectors you can use. Yeah. So and you're thinking of taking I think it was the last show you did. You're thinking of taking that to the schools. Can you talk about that show?
Sure. So we wrote an original play. Brianna Ops, who's the managing director of Thinking Cap, we wrote an original play together towards the end of last year that was inspired by interviews with Florida Christmas tree farmers. But the play is really about more than just the tree farmers. It's sort of about solstice and the history of evergreens, and what they meant in the darkness of winter as sort of a symbol of hope for people. And also about, a Florida family, a South Florida family that travels from South Florida to North Florida to purchase a tree. And the family happens to be a family that has both Catholic relatives and Jewish relatives. And so it's a real melding of holiday traditions and faith and spiritual practices that I think is unique to Florida, but also speaks to anyone anywhere in an urban place where you have families that are much more diverse than we might think. So we would like to do something with that piece to get it actually into school systems, because it's a family-centered play. So that is something that we are working on as we revise the script, maybe look at adding a song or two, revamp the title, and see if we can work to let more young people experience it.
What I took away from that show was actually just sheer joy. I mean, I suppose that that's what the holiday season, no matter what faith you belong to, is really about, right? It's about family, joy, love, you know, and it really came across. So yeah, it's great. And I think it would be wonderful for the schools. And it was called Oh Christmas Tree. What are you changing the title to now?
We are considering calling it Evergreen, so we can really tap into that sort of ancient and kind of universal theme of what these sacred trees represented before they were taken up by really Martin Luther, and Protestants are the ones that made trees. They were at the beginning of this sort of movement to make trees part of a Christian holiday. So we're thinking about that. We're thinking about Evergreen, a holiday play with music.
So the evergreen is it is
Actually, I just thought of this now that we're sitting here, but I need to write this down, which is it would also open up the possibility, since the play is about, a Cuban Catholic mother and a Jewish grandmother. I feel like we could go with the Hanukkah bush idea, which falls into the evergreen sort of category too. So gives me more hope that title could be a way to revise and improve the piece. So we'll see.
So what are the cultures that were part of the evergreen tradition?
I mean, this goes back to ancient times. I don't know that anyone in more recent centuries, like 1500s, 1600s, was necessarily tending to that. I'm not sure. I have to research more into what else inspired Martin Luther to take that up.
Yeah, I had a feeling that the ancient Romans also had evergreens in their culture. I'm not sure how. I'd have to look that up too. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I know I read about the fact that they would bring these, they would clip them and they would bring branches and they would hang them over their doors into their home and within the interiors of their home during the winter, because it was something that actually was still alive when everything else was cold and frozen.
And I would think it would be part of the Scandinavian culture too,
Yeah.
like pre-Christian Scandinavian culture.
Yeah, and it may well have been. I mean, I'm not, that's the thing I don't know yet, is if it was localized in one part of the world or not. Something to investigate.
So yeah, that must have been quite an adventure to write and produce your own play. It's been great.
Yeah.
So, and normally, what is your process for selecting plays?
I mean, the process for selecting plays really is not anything unique, I don't think. Before the Kilroy list existed, I just, I would go to Drama Bookshop in New York. I was on, different blogs, having playwrights directly send me plays. I no shortage of plays of my own that I'd had from like years and years and years of being in school studying drama. I would say, it comes down in one sense to economics, right? To looking at the cast size of scripts and to making sure that whatever the play requires can be achieved well with whatever the budget, is for a given show or a given season. But, I'm always looking for plays that represent the diversity of the world in which we live. I mean, we've never really had a season that we weren't taking on a major issue. I mean, one of the first plays that we ever produced was a play about a transgender Kenyan man and female genital mutilation. So we've never shied away from really intense topics, but nonetheless very important topics. I'm always looking for plays that explore gender and sexuality, and plays that experiment with form. So, you find it's sort of one play or playwright leads to another, and you find a whole sort of network of plays that, in our case, typically are plays that you would see produced, in a major city, off Broadway or off Loop in Chicago or somewhere, wherever in the city, more adventurous fare is produced. That's the kind of work that we've always gravitated towards.
Do you ever produce plays by local playwrights? Or have you ever done that?
We've not ever produced a play by a local playwright as a main stage production. We've never commissioned anything either. The closest we've come to producing anything by local playwrights would be through our reading series that we do in association with the playwriting workshops that we've started offering in the last couple of years. It's not something we're opposed to, but it's not something that has really, I can only think of, maybe can count on one hand the number of times that maybe we've been approached by someone local, but I wouldn't be able to count on 5 fingers in all these years. So, I mean, we've had a lot of people just cold solicit with their plays, but they're all over the place. They're not necessarily local playwrights. So.
And what do you see as the future of Thinking Cap? What direction you're going to go in the future? Do you know? Or
I don't have the answer to that. I wish I did. I would say my hope for Thinking Cap is that Thinking Cap will be around for another decade or two. I think that while the theater scene has changed a lot in the time that we've existed, and by that I mean, in the time that I've been here since 2010, a lot of larger theaters have closed. Mosaic Theater closed, Florida Stage closed. Other companies have arisen. And so there's been a change in the ecosystem here in a lot of ways. And the changeover in theater companies is just one of them. That said, I think that the mission of Thinking Cap remains unique and important in our region. I mean, I haven't done the numbers recently, like in a full spreadsheet, but I know that, in our region, we are still seeing more plays by men produced than plays by women or non-binary playwrights. We are still seeing men directing more than women, although we are seeing more women directing. So I think that the principles that our mission rests on are important just from the standpoint of how we operate, how we program, how we hire. And I think that the kinds of the kinds of plays that we program also still need to be heard. So hopefully we'll be around for a while. We'll see. Regardless of whether that means, there was a point where we were programming like 6 or 7 plays a year, which was just too much. But I would be happy if we just produced 2 or 3 plays a year and continued to do workshops and other kinds of programming so that people have a variety of offerings to experience with us.
So I understand that you were invited to direct a play at Island City Stage.
Yes.
Did you choose the play or did they choose it or?
No, I actually didn't know. I wasn't familiar with the play when they approached me to direct it. I understand why, I think, why I was approached to direct it. It's a play by a female playwright, lesbian female playwright that inspired by lesbian pulp fiction from the mid 20th century. And it's an all-female cast. So I understand why I was asked to direct it. But that alone would not have been enough to persuade me to direct it. I read the piece, and it's a really stylized piece, which really speaks to my sort of aesthetic, I think, as a director and a designer. So I liked this. I like the style of the piece, and I like the characters in the play are really quite endearing and very much inspired by early film, and particularly Barbara Stanwyck. And it has a happy ending, which is really nice. It's not like a dark and depressing lesbian play. So, and it's a musical. So there's the opportunity to work with some really great actresses with beautiful voices that I've worked with before, hopefully, and some new. So yeah, so it's a good piece, and I appreciate that they've asked me to do it.
Yeah, can't wait to see it. Okay, is there anything else you would like to talk about about Thinking Cap, or?
Um, I mean, not specifically. I mean, I would say, I appreciate that you're posting a series that gives women in the community the opportunity to talk about the work that they're doing, because you know, conversations and visibility and presence are really important, and we need more of it.
Um, there's another question I wanted to ask you, and it has to do with you. I guess it has to do with dramaturgy and how you develop your plays. You've started. Well, I know you have a podcast with Fornez, and you also had I think you had a podcast going, or maybe not. Maybe it was just an interview with scholars who knew a lot about the history of Christmas trees.
Yeah.
But how often do you do that?
So we also have one on Oscar Wilde, and it's our podcast is something that we fully plan to nurture more. I just had a new episode this morning. I just recently interviewed Stevie Walker Webb about a production that of a Fornez play that he is directing right now for Baltimore Center Stage. So we will continue to, I mean, I'm a member of something called the Fornez Institute. So I'm writing an essay right now about Fornez for a book on her that's going to be published by Oxford University at some time in the next year. So very, very passionate about Fornez, and will continue to follow the production of her work and talk with scholars on that sort of series of our podcast. But what our plan is to have more series that we can continue to nurture under the larger umbrella of our overall podcast, which is Thoughts on Theater, Culture, and Life. So we may do some Shakespeare again in the future, and I would like to start developing a series on Shakespeare where we can talk with Shakespeare scholars and practitioners and that sort of thing. So really, as of right now, we have not had any kind of regularity to the podcast series, other than the fact that we keep going back to it, but we aren't posting, weekly or bi-weekly or monthly at this point. But we are definitely looking to continue creating series that we can build on continually over time, whether it's connected to our work or something that's happening somewhere else. Because I've always felt like it's important to make sure that we kind of have a dual focus, which is what's happening in our own community and internally within Thinking Cap, but also what's happening, across the state and across the country and across the Atlantic, for that matter. So the podcast is one way that we can really kind of have, shrink and expand our network accordingly.
I think locally anyway, in terms of theater companies, that's pretty original, right? I don't know of many other theater companies who do that.
To be honest, I don't know. I don't know. I just know that, for us, it was something that seemed like it was for the holiday show last year with the Christmas tree farmers. It was kind of built into our pitch for that whole project and a grant that we had through Florida Humanities. But by that time, we had already created a podcast on Fornez. We had actually begun the podcast on Fornez in March of 2020. And then the world shut down and our production of Fafu and Her Friends was delayed until just this last year in 2023. So, or 2022 rather. And so it's something that we've been kind of slowly developing for several years now. So I don't know what others are doing, but for us, it just has to be authentic and make sense with what speaks to our mission and to us as artists.
So what attracts you most about Fornez? I know that there's a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, really everything. And I say, the podcast series on Fornez is called The Future is Fornez. And the reason that there were a lot of reasons why we named it that, but the sort of most obvious one to me is that I felt like she was very much ahead of her time, and she really continues to be. Her work, no two plays of hers were alike, and she wrote over 40 of them. But she really, to me, kind of encapsulates everything that I love about our mission, which is she was a really, really talented woman, playwright and director and designer. She was kind of a total artist and auteur. And she was prolific, and she wrote on topics that were not easy. She depicts people experiencing great suffering and pain, but also great love and great joy. And she really experimented with form, and it wasn't because she was trained. This is long before the days of MFAs. She just was
passionate,
a natural born artist. She was always innovating. So my love of Fornez has to do with all of those things. I mean, her plays really do sort of teach us still, like, how we can play and innovate within our art form.
Yeah, I like that idea of innovation. So often I think in recent times there's been different kinds of plays and more exciting forms, but a lot of times you see the same formulaic script, that kind of follows the story from beginning to end. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's really exciting when you come up with new ideas and new forms and new ways to reach audiences and have audiences think about what you do. So.
Yeah, I mean, Fornez is someone who, has really been a great inspiration to a lot of playwrights that have ultimately ended up with more high-profile careers than she had. Like Tony Kushner has spoken many times about what a great influence she was on him, along with his mother, which tells you a lot. And Paula Vogel also. I mean, Fafu ends with a sort of literal death and a figurative death. I mean, she was ending plays in really unconventional ways that, today critics still are baffled by how some of her plays end. But we see more and more plays with unconventional endings, right? That don't have this like perfect ending where everything is tied up and everything is
right.
Yeah. Which really is I think much more like life. But I think we also need all kinds of plays. So she was writing plays that really tested just about every aspect of dramaturgy we can talk about.
For the past 3 years, I've been writing a play about Amelia Bassano. Have you ever heard of her?
No, who's that?
She was a woman, a contemporary of Shakespeare, or the person that the gentleman Will Shakespeare, who has generally been attributed as the author of the Shakespearean plays. But there are some people who think that it may have been her.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I've been working on it, doing research, and I'm getting close to the end of my first draft. It's a full-length play, but anyway, I'm excited
Okay,
about it.
great.
But yeah, I think I'm going to turn to Fornez to see if I can get some inspiration to finish it and rewrite it. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah, Fornez was always looking back. I mean, she was always looking back at what people were writing about, thinking about long before her. I mean, her very first play, or her first produced play from 1963 called Tango Palace, has a very old soul, and it's a two-person play where the one character is constantly looking back, and he has a line where he's like, now and then. And so Fornez did that throughout her career. She was obsessed with Hedda Gabler and Ibsen, and she wrote a play that was about the actress who originated the role of Hedda, and the sort of backstory behind what inspired Ibsen to write that play. So this kind of looking back to Shakespeare and Emilia Bassano sounds very much like it resonates with with an impulse that Fornez would have had too. So maybe you're really onto something.
I hope so. Okay, well, Nicole, it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Yeah,
I wish you the best of luck with everything, everything you're doing now and will be doing this year.
yeah, that's right. Thank you.
And thanks for sharing your thoughts. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Lori.
All right.